So hello and welcome to Handmade Chelsea Online, another live session. So we are joined by Deborah Timperley, who is who works in the discipline of glass. Now today's title is The Alchemy of Glass, Textiles and Plaster, and why they are her favourite materials. So I'm going to jump straight in. But first, I just need to remind you all that this is, again, a live session, so do use that chat function for any questions throughout. And then when it comes to a really good point, I will interject and ask Deborah the question. So, Deborah, I'm going to jump straight in. So, could you give us a little bit about your background, as being a maker hasn't been your only career?
That's right. In another life, I would have talked to you about how to make a wild mushroom terrine or how to cook scallops. My first career was in the hotel catering industry. I loved cooking. I think I've really always enjoyed being creative. So I did 15 years of that, and then I decided I wanted to be a professional designer maker. I probably didn't know it was actually called that then. And I took a degree in glass and ceramics, and that was over 20 years ago. And it was obviously the right choice because I still really enjoy making. Some years ago, I stopped making ceramics to focus on glass. It's a challenging material. It's a very beautiful material, but you do have to get it right technically, or else it doesn't do what you want it to do, or it cracks. It takes a certain strength of character. So now, having worked with glass in a number of ways, I've decided, I know what I like to invest with it is casting. So I make cast bowls and cast sculptures. And I'd like to tell you about the variety of materials and techniques I use to create them. And they're techniques that I've developed over the years that work for me. As a maker, I'm working alone in my workshop. So I've developed the methods that suit what I'm inspired by.
There you go. So you said within that glass isn't your only favourite material. What else do you work with then?
Well, I did both glass and ceramics at college, which meant that I learned lots of different mould making techniques, such as slip casting, moulds with several parts, moulds for blowing glass into, and moulds for lost wax casting. And I discovered that I loved plaster.
Plaster. I wouldn't kind of go, oh, I fell in love with plaster. Why plaster?
Well, because it may appear an unglamorous material to work with and to work with the buckets and the plaster, but it's actually where the magic happens. Let me start with my bowls. This is in pale copper blue. The texture is cast from a ribbed fabric. I don't know how well you can actually see the texture, but you can probably hear it. That's the ribbed fabric. And I've folded it so that you can really see the folds very strongly. And I've also fired 23.5 carat gold into the glass. Gold is another of my favorite materials. So this ribbed fabric that you can see and hear is actually this sort of fabric. So I tend to use upholstery fabric because it's got a deeper weave. So again, you can probably hear the weave of that. It's a lovely strong fabric, and it makes a really good texture for my work. Another fabric I like using is this rug canvas. I like grids, and I find that very inspirational to work from. And the wonderful thing about plaster is that it takes on every nuance of the fabric. It takes on every stray thread. It takes on every wrinkle, every crease. It's really, really effective. You can see this bowl here, which you can also see on my profile pages for Handmade. It's cast from a wrinkled fabric all around the edges, but this central area is cast from rug canvas, and I've used the grid of the rug canvas as the basis of my mosaic, and into each little square I've painted different shades of blue enamels. And the different blues look lovely with the 23.5 carat gold that I've fired into the glass.
So we were looking at there, and I know we've got different bowls, certainly different bowls on the Handmade Chelsea online shop. But I've actually seen now your flower and berry bowls don't look very similar. Do you use fabric or don't you use fabric on those?
Well, I use a tiny bit of fabric, but very closely related. So this is an example of one of the bowls that Alice was just mentioning. I wanted to make some pieces that were a bit less abstract with some kind of flower imagery. And in the haberdashery department, I found a treasure trove of buttons which were just right. So I've got some examples here. You can see this button here, and it's a textile button with quite a lot of stitchery on it, which gives me a perfect sort of abstract flower design. Another couple here, which I hope will show on the screen, and they're probably made of plastic or resin, but they just make perfect little abstract berries or flowers. And another button I use a lot in my design is this one, which is a little bit hard to see maybe, but it's kind of a faceted, shiny button, which is a very nice contrast to the sort of highly decorated buttons that I'm using for the others. So it's a nice foil to the more detailed areas of the glass. The mold making is really interesting to arrive at these. I first of all cast the buttons into silicone and then into gel flex, but then I need to cast them into plaster. So here is a plaster mold, my beloved plaster, which I think you can see has got little recesses, which are exactly like the buttons that I've just showed you. So I make this plaster mold, and then into it I put glass frit, which is pieces of glass, which are like this. They could be a little bit smaller as well, in whatever color I choose. And then I put little chunks into the recesses of my mold. I know exactly how much to put in because I weigh the glass, and I fill the mold with the glass, and then I put it into the kiln for 4 days, and after which I end up with, it is rather messy, this plaster, I end up with glass buttons which are exactly like the ones that you've just seen here.
So you've got those glass buttons. So you kind of cast the buttons. You've got them really left fast. But then, how do they actually then become, a part of some of your pieces? So how does it become, part of your bowls that you do?
Well, here's one that I made earlier. I include all the flowers and berries in my plaster cast for the whole bowl. You can see here there's a textured background, which is a different sort of fabric. And then I've cast the different buttons in different coloured glasses. So I'll put this into the kiln with a billeted glass. So I buy my glass, it's American glass, bullseye glass. That mold will take about 1 billet of glass. I sometimes break it up with a hammer so that it flows really evenly. And then that is in the kiln for 4 days. So after it's cooled, I take it out of the kiln, I break away the mold, so it really is a one-off piece. There's plaster everywhere here. It's not finished yet, it still needs to have the edges polished. So here's another bowl that's also on the online shop. You can see here that it's lovely, it's a clear glass with lilac and aquamarine coloured flowers. A little bit more of that ribbed fabric there and a different fabric here. The underneath is really very nice as well because it's clear glass. You can see through to the colours of the flowers and berries, and you can see that the edges are highly polished, which is a lovely contrast to the slight opacity of the textured surface. So this goes back into the kiln to slump into a bowl former, which is what gives it this nice curve, so that it makes it into a bowl. And also I paint all the detail of the flowers with a real gold luster, so that highlights them really very nicely. So that's how they're incorporated into the mold. and into the bowl. It's a really lovely process working through it. And it was a process that I kind of really came upon during lockdown. So that was really a silver lining.
I'm always surprised actually how many techniques go into one piece, because of course when we see it, it's a solid piece, and then we don't know that there's all these little pieces that are coming together to then make one. Thank you for that. That's really, really interesting. But I can spy something completely different behind you. Now that doesn't look like what we've been talking about. Now I know they are your rocky sculptures. Now, what is your inspiration for those? Because that is completely different to, our kind of flower button bowls, that you've just shown us.
Well, the joy of glass is its infinite possibilities. And these pieces explore the beauty of stone bridges, dry stone walls, rocky outcrops, and harbour walls. And this one I'm holding up is a fairly recent piece of an arched bridge over water. So you'll see the blue of the water, and then clear above it, which draws you through to the light, the other side of the bridge. And then the bridge itself is in shades of grey and bronze glass. And what I'm really striving for with these, it is completely different, as you say. I want them to be evocative of the landscape, and I want them to suggest stones and rocks placed harmoniously together. And I really want to contrast the very strongly defined edges with the softness of the adjacent vegetation. And also I use blocks of colour to echo the surrounding landscape and the water and the sky. And I feel that the pieces have a real sense of place and atmosphere.
Can you just hold that up just a little bit higher again? So we didn't actually see that nice. So it can actually sit, on a flat surface. So it can go on a mantelpiece or on a table. What does the back look like? Is that the same? So you can really put that up against something, or you can kind of really tactile and feel it, so it's rocky and then smooth.
The back is shiny, and it's in the back particularly. You can see, so it's nice from both sides, but obviously the front is the sort of the really three-dimensional side. But the back, you can see that the piece has been in the kiln. Well, it's in the kiln for 6 days, but it's been held at the top temperature for 4 hours. So the glass really does melt, and it the colours slightly flow into each other. So it has a really lovely sort of watercolour effect.
For me, because the piece is called Arch Bridge, it's like you're actually looking at the top of the bridge and looking down and looking at the reflection in the water. So having the blues, but then those darker colours you'd expect from the reflection of a brick bridge, a stone bridge. So that's what it evokes for me. I don't know what it evokes for others, but that's certainly what it reminds me of. They're beautiful, beautiful colours. So,
Thank you.
So how do you really make them? Now don't give us all your secret techniques, but I know that one of your favourite materials, plaster, does play a big part in them too.
It does. So I build the sculptures from chunks of glass. So here's a couple of chunks in different greens. I've broken it up with a hammer. So what I do is I break up all the colours I think I'm going to use. So I'll have a pile of, say, pale green chunks and dark green, and then I might have clear, aquamarine, whatever, amber, whatever colour I'm using. I sort of have a heap of broken up irregular sized chunks that I break up with a hammer. And so that's really my palette. So that's like an artist with his watercolour palette. Then using my sketches and my photographs, I build up the sculpture's form and I glue it together. Now, just let me be quite clear that there's no glue in my finished sculpture. It's just so that I can get the sculpture together because they're quite heavy. They can be the edges of glass can be quite sharp. And then I'm able to move the sculpture into the kiln. And in the kiln, that's where the plaster comes in. So I use a loose mold mix of plaster. So it's not a set mold mix like you saw with this piece or the other pieces I was showing you. It's granular, so you can almost think it's a bit like flour, but a bit chunkier than that. So I pack that all around the kiln, all around the glass. In some places tighter than others, in other places a bit looser, because I want the glass to have room for a little bit of movement, because that's what kind of gives the glass the soft which is sort of reminiscent of the adjacent vegetation. So the plaster really does form a part in giving the glass some characteristics, which is the characteristics that I'm really trying to convey in my pieces. And as I said, my sculptures are fired in the kiln for 6 days on their own in the kiln. And here's an example of one. You can tell me if it needs to go higher or lower. That is, the colours are reminiscent of heathers and of sort of a moody sky. And this one is, it's different to the other one. This is very three-dimensional. And it's really lovely colours. It looks beautiful with sun shining through it. And but these sculptures are very interesting. If they're on a windowsill with the changing light, so whether it's bright sunshine or slightly occluded or a dull day, then they can look have a different sort of mood about them. So that is based on a dry stone wall that's slightly tumbling down, and that one is on the website as well.
So we've seen kind of different, so we've seen you do kind of vessel collection, and then you've got your more sculptural pieces. So we've seen a range. I mean, do they come all in different sizes? Because I can see a much larger kind of rock formation, and you've got the smaller ones. How important does scale actually, work within your collection? Is scale important, for you as well?
Well, I do a whole variety of sizes. You've seen a couple of different ones. I mean, here, so these are sort of much more handheld size. This one is in a lovely amber glass, and it's fired with 23.5 carat gold, which is reminiscent of golden lichen that you see on rocky outcrops. I do have my favourite materials, so as well as the glamour of the plaster and the buckets, there's also the glamour of the gold, which I also really like. So that's so I do a whole series of small ones which are called rocky outcrops. I'm really aiming for a natural form, and there's another example here which is in nice sort of autumnal colours with its sort of russets, ambers and reds and different greens. So I've got a whole collection of these small ones, which are obviously all on the website as well. So I hope I've given you a bit of an insight into what motivates me and inspires me. It's mostly a joy when I open the kiln. It is kind of the pleasure. I mean, it's also the alchemy of the kiln as well. So it is mostly very joyful opening the kiln. Occasionally it's not, but they're all part of those opening times are all part of the learning curve of working with glass. So if anybody's got any questions, please visit me. I'll be in my chat room this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I know when you open the kiln, even if it's the perfect piece, you still can't touch it yet because it's going to burn your hands. It's the temptation. I don't know how you just don't want to go and just like pick it up and grab it. It's kind of like you have to still keep waiting. It's that anticipation, which I think a lot of makers have, regardless of what their material is. It is that anticipation. Does that kind of keep you going? Or is that led to some kind of new, is that led to something that's effectively not gone right? Has that inspired you, led you on to a different design or a different process, that you now incorporate?
You're right about the patience angle, because the kiln is pretty cold when I open it, but the inside of the mould might not be so cold. So I'm always itching to sort of wash off the plaster and really sort of hold it up to the light and have a look at it. But then I still probably need to wait another day before I can actually really see the piece when it's cleaned up.
A question. Thank you very much, Tanya, for getting in touch. She says, what's one of your favourite, projects, or perhaps what's one of your favourite pieces on the Handmade Chelsea online, that you've got, for sale from our audience members?
One of my favourite pieces of actually would definitely be, without a doubt, it would be this bridge over water. You know, for me, it really does work. It really does say what it is that I'm trying to say. And so I've done 1 or 2 pieces now that are bridges over water as opposed to arched bridges, and I think that's probably the way which my work is going forward, is that with the bridges and the water and the landscape theme all coming together.
It's very evocative, the colours of the landscape. So you can, there's so just a huge spectrum. You know, it's not just, you know, even though we're into autumn, it's like going into dark and then light. But then the contrast between dark and light could be the sunset, the, you know, the sunrise. I mean, just the piece that you've got behind, I can see yellows, I can see blues, I can see greens, I can see red. You know, you've got a really, you know, dare I say, solid palette. You know, certainly for your rocky formations. I think they're wonderful. I really do. So I'm afraid we're coming to the end, Deborah. But thank you once again so much for your time. It's been really lovely to get to know you, your love of plaster, but also, you know, for talking through your collection. It's been lovely to hear the stories and, you know, the inspiration behind them. It really does help, you know, help them come alive. So if anyone wants to find out more. And as Deborah said, she's going to be in her live chat room later on this afternoon. And you can access live chat just through our website, interact.handmadeinbritain.co.uk. Click on live chat and you can find Deborah's room just on the left-hand side of your screen. But in the meantime, I'm just going to put a direct link straight to Deborah's shop. So you can actually go on and all the pieces that we've spoken about this afternoon, this afternoon, you can actually go and you can actually see a lovely description, the dimensions, so really seeing how that can fit into, you know, hopefully your home or even your studio or place of work, because they're beautiful. So once again, Deborah, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed your time.
It was a pleasure.
No, thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you.